بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So we completed the first chapter of the book, which is the Kitab al-Tahara, and we're going to start today with the Kitab al-Salah, the chapter of prayer. This one is probably the most important of all, especially if you're studying a preliminary or primary text in fiqh. This is probably the most important thing to know because it's going to affect your worship daily. I think wudu is similarly important in tahara, but this is definitely very, very important. So I've made some changes to how the slides are going to be done, inshallah, and I'll go back and make some changes to the tahara ones as well. But basically, there are some slides where I put some comments to kind of point out issues that are a bit of controversy, so that you can access them if you want to on your own later, inshallah ta'ala. But you're still going to have to take some notes, and there'll still be slides that have evidence, and I'll point out the pieces of evidence that I think you should know. So take note of that and kind of look at that slide with the evidence in it, write it down, know in Arabic, know where it was, like in the books of, whether it's in the Quran or it's in the books of Hadith. I don't want you to know a lot of this stuff, but I do want you to know a few key pieces of evidence that are important. That's how you kind of build your understanding of how evidence is used and interpreted within fiqh. So we start with Kitab al-Salah, inshallah, the times of the prescribed prayers. So the beginning of it talks about the obligatory prayers. So he says, the Musannif rahimahullah wa nafa'na bi'ilmi, he says, الصلاة المفروضة خمس. There are five obligatory daily prayers. الظهر, of course, obviously الظهر والعصر والمغرب والعشاء والفجر, but he's going to start by telling us each salah and then when its time actually starts. And this is nice, this is helpful. If we weren't recording this, I would probably open those doors and we go stand outside and do an experiment where we take a stick and we put it perpendicular to the ground and then look at its shade and understand that that's how they figured out what time it was for prayer. They would have a stick and they would look at it and they would know based on its dhil, where its shade is, or the shadow of anything perpendicular to the earth, what time of the day it was. They were very, very dependent on the sun when it comes to the daily prayers in the day. And then even at night, we're still dependent on the sun. We're dependent on some of the beams of light that come in the horizon of the sun, from the sun as well. And that's how we kind of know what prayer it is. So al-dhuhru وَأَوَّلُ وَقْتِهَا زَوَالُ الشَّمْسِ وَآخِرُهُ إِذَا صَارَ ظِلُّ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ مِثْلَهُ بَعْدَ ظِلِّ الزَّوَالِ. Okay, so what does this all mean? وَأَوَّلُ وَقْتِهَا زَوَالُ الشَّمْسِ. So the time of the noon prayer begins with the sun passing its zenith. So right in the middle, zenith is when there's no shade at all, right? That's the moment it moves, the moment there's like even the smallest millimeter of a shade, that's when dhuhr begins. That's when the salat al-dhuhr actually starts. The moment it goes beyond zenith, right in the middle of the sky where there's no shade left, it moves a little bit, that's when dhuhr begins. وآخره وآخر وقتها إذا صار ظل كل شيء مثله بعد ظل الزوال. It ends when the length of an object's shadow minus its shadow at the zenith is the same as its height. This is technical, so you don't have to understand it that way. You can just say that it ends when the length of any object's shadow equals the length of the object. That's when dhuhr ends. All right. And I'll comment a little bit more about these. Let's go through the text first, and then I'll do some commentary, inshallah. وَالْعَصْرُ, which is the second prayer. So the خمسٌ, الظهر والعصر. وَأَوَّلُ وَقْتِهَا الزِّيَادَةُ عَلَى ظِلِّ الْمِثْلِ وَآخِرُهُ فِي الْاخْتِيَارِ إِلَى ظِلِّ الْمِثْلَيْنِ وَفِي الْجَوَازِ إِلَى غُرُوبِ الشَّمْسِ. All right, so what does this mean? The time for the mid-afternoon prayer, which is asr, begins when the length of an object's shadow, minus its shadow at the zenith. What's the shadow of something at the zenith? Nothing. So it's minus zero, basically. It's a technical term. It's not. It doesn't really mean much. So it begins when the length of an object's shadow is greater than the object's height. So you have a stick, and the shadow is exactly its length. That's when dhuhr ends, and asr begins. Right? Its preferred time, and this is something you're going to find in the Shafi'i madhab, where they talk about fil ikhtiyar. See this term here, and then wa fil jawaz. Ikhtiyar means this is where they prefer, this is the time they prefer you to pray this prayer in. Fil jawaz means, and it's permissible to go as far as this timing. And the Shafi'iyya have this terminology. Not all of the madhab have this terminology. I like it because it kind of just reminds us to pray a little bit earlier. But not all of the madhab have this terminology. So wafil ikhtiyar, and the choice وآخره في الاختيار, I mean, and the best, and the where it ends in terms of its preferred time. Its preferred time ends when an object's shadow is twice its height. إلى ظل المثلين. Right? So for the Shafi'iyya, this is important because I'm going to point out for you in a moment how the Hanafis kind of differ on this. So for the Shafi'iyya, and for the majority of the madhahib, by the way, not just the Shafi'iyya, but the majority aside besides the Hanafi, it starts when the shadow is just bigger than its height, and it goes until it's twice its height. And then it's permissible, time extends until sunset, until there's no more shade anymore because the sun has fully set. So that means Asr is, what time is Asr now? Asr is 4:36, and Maghrib is 7:13. Of course, in Canada, it's much more difficult to make these calculations because we're living in the upper hemisphere, like we're living in a place where the sun, it just is when you're living in the close to the equator and between the timings throughout the year are much more stable, so it's easier to have these calculations. Here, the time is so much more limited. So basically, an hour after Asr, that's the from 4:35 to 5:35 is the timing for the Shafi'iyya as seen to prime time, the preferred time, and then it's permissible until Maghrib time. But that's how the Shafi'iyya look at this, and I'll make some I'll do some commentary in a moment. So that's for Asr. والمغرب ووقتها واحد وهو غروب الشمس وبمقدار ما يؤذن ويتوضأ ويستر العورة ويقيم الصلاة ويصلي 5 ركعات. All right. This is interesting because this is where the Shafi'iyya have their specific opinion that not all of the madhahib actually agree to. So what they say about Maghrib, they say the time for sunset prayer is a single time, meaning it's not an extended amount of time. It's just something that it's a moment. It's a moment in time, so it's not really an extended amount of time. It begins when the sun sets completely and lasts long enough for one to perform the call to prayer, adhan, make ablution, make wudu, cover what must be covered for prayers, covering the awrah, perform the call to commence the prayer, iqamah, and then pray 5 rak'at. 5 rak'at as in 3 of Maghrib, 2 of Sunnah and then 3 of Maghrib, or 3 of Maghrib and 2 of Sunnah. Regardless, it doesn't make a difference. But that's the timing for Maghrib for the Imam Shafi'i. For Imam Shafi'i, and this is in the new madhab. Remember I pointed this out to you a couple of weeks ago, that the Shafi'i had, and I'll repeat it again again, I'm going to require you to know certain things about what a madhab is and why it is we're studying a specific madhab and how we're supposed to view madhahib. That's going to be a part of the learning objectives of this course, is that you understand why it is we're studying something, what you're going to do with this knowledge, what value this knowledge is supposed to have for you. Because if you don't know that, then I basically harmed you. Because now you're going to walk away not knowing what to do with the information that you have. So it's important to know what this information is going to be used for. So I'll repeat this quite a bit throughout the course. But the Shafi'i has something called al-Qadim wal-Jadid, old and new. Because Imam Shafi'i, when he lived in Mecca, he made his first madhab. Like he put together his methodology of interpreting and processing evidence. And he came up with a lot of opinions. Then he moved to Cairo, and he lived in Egypt. And once he lived in Egypt, he looked around, and he said, okay, this... my opinions, because he had different pieces of evidence, and the circumstances, the context, the people around him had changed, so he actually developed a new madhab. That's why the Shafi'i specifically, when you study their books, you find that within the madhab itself, within the school of jurisprudence, you'll find sometimes 2 opinions. قال في القديم كذا وفي الجديد كذا. This is what they said in his old opinion, this is his new opinion. This book here doesn't really do that very often. It just gives the new madhab, and it kind of ignores the old, except in specific places, for reasons that the author, rahmatullah alayhi, he had specific reasons that he wanted to do that. So for the old madhab of Shafi'i, they don't see that. They see Maghrib to start at when the sun sets completely, and it goes until Isha time. But fil Jadid, Imam Shafi'i had different pieces of evidence, and he decided that this was going to be, he saw this to be shorter than that. And so, and he uses this piece of evidence, and that's why I want you to. So maybe make a note of that if you're keeping. So this is how he interpreted this piece of evidence, Imam Shafi'i. He has the hadith of Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi, where Ibn Abbas says that the hadith is a long hadith, but it says in it that Jibreel alayhi salam صلى بالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المغرب في اليومين حين أفطر الصائم أي في وقت واحد وبعد الغروب. Meaning, twice there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ points out that Jibreel prayed Imam to him, in front of him ﷺ, twice, right at Ghurub, for Maghrib, twice. So his interpretation of that is that this is the only time. He didn't, twice in a row, exactly the same time, didn't extend it at all. That's how he interpreted this being closer. Obviously the rest of the madhahib don't interpret it that way, but this is the piece of information that he used. And of course, the Imam who wrote this book here, the commentary, comments on this interpretation of the evidence. Even for him, as a Shafi'i scholar, wasn't what he agrees with. He agrees with the other hadith where hadith Muslim. Where's hadith Muslim? Let me show it to you a moment. تمام. With the hadith of the Prophet, أخر المغرب حتى كان عند سقوط الشفق, where the Prophet ﷺ actually pushed the Maghrib until the shafaq, which I'll explain in a moment what it is, was not visible anymore. And the hadith in Muslim, وقت صلاة المغرب ما لم يغب الشفق. The time for Maghrib is until the beam of light is no longer visible. So this is a good example of how within the madhab you'll find more than one piece of evidence, and the later scholars of the madhab may actually go back and rectify an opinion that existed earlier on in the madhab. So now if you study fiqh Shafi'i and you don't use an old text, you only use a new text that is written by scholars who are more modern, like in the last maybe 100, 200 years, you won't find this opinion. This opinion, they've actually removed it. They basically joined the jumhur in terms of how they look at this issue. And this is just an example for me of how fiqh evolves. Even within a single school of jurisprudence, they will look at evidence, and then they will go back and they will revise it again, and then they'll say, okay, maybe this way of interpreting wasn't the right way, and they interpret it differently. But that's the Shafi'i, and this is a good mas'ala. This is something good. This is something I may ask, because understanding what I just explained is important. So if you comprehend how this kind of works, it's more to me it's more the methodology of how things happen than the final result. So the final outcome is fine. You can just Google stuff, and it's not that hard to find a hukum, like a ruling. You can find a lot of rulings. It's not difficult. But the question is, do you understand why it is that there are sometimes difference in rulings, or where they come from? What's the background? That is more what I'm interested in you kind of comprehending to a certain degree, without going into too much detail and you getting bored of this. So that's Maghrib. والعشاء وأول وقتها إذا غاب الشفق الأحمر وآخره في الاختيار إلى ثلث الليل وفي الجواز إلى طلوع الفجر الثاني. All right. So the time for the night prayer begins when the red in the sky disappear. They call it الشفق الأحمر. So the redness. So the issue with the night prayers, and I put this in a slide over here. So where did I put it here? So differences in determining night prayers, so Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha specifically, comes from the need for a flat horizon to determine the red and white glows or beams of light that exist in the horizon. Different angles are permissible to be used to determine these lights, which is why Isha time can range during the summer around 30 minutes. Because it comes to, for all this to work, we have to have a horizon. Now, where is there a horizon in Canada? You have to go drive out west and towards Saskatoon and whatnot, and then it's just flat road, and then you can actually determine when Maghrib is very clearly in Isha. But here, when you're living on land that has a lot of ups and downs and mountains and hills, if I'm standing here, I don't know. I don't see the sun anymore because it's behind the mountain, but hasn't actually set down beyond the horizon, which is what Maghrib is. If I have a mountain beside me, and I don't understand that it has to set beyond the horizon, then Maghrib will always, other than 3 or 4 hours early because the mountain is so high. Now, that may be easy because I may be able to predict or understand kind of when the sun is setting on the horizon. But then when it comes to Isha, it's all about Shafaq al-Ahmar. So when the sun sets, you still see some redness, very clear redness in the horizon. You'll see this if you're going to the beach and the beach is towards, or the water, the body of water is towards the west. You can see the redness in the horizon after the sun is gone. Now, Maghrib is from the moment that last piece of sun is no longer visible in the horizon until there is no more redness. There's still some light coming. The light is usually whitish in color or sometimes yellowish, but it's not red anymore. Once that red color is gone, that's when Isha begins. This is a subjective measurement. The zenith, for example, is not. When you have a stick in the ground, right? When the shade is exactly its length and more, that's an objective measurement. I just measure this, I put it on the ground, I put the measure, I put it up here, and I wait. The moment goes beyond, Allahu Akbar. When it comes to the red, the redness in the horizon, that is actually debatable, whether there's a little bit more redness or not. Where am I looking at it from? Am I looking at it from the angle that is parallel to the earth? Am I rising up a little bit and looking at this from a higher angle, depending on where the median point within the city is in comparison to the horizon itself? So all these different measurements, which is why the time for Isha specifically can differ a little bit, depending on what angle we're using. So see, people come and ask, well, why are we doing Isha in the summer 30 minutes early? And some people won't pray Isha with us because they think we're actually breaking rules. It's not that. This is a subjective measurement. There are different ways to measure Isha. So depending on where you live, use the measurement that allows for the day to exist a bit more reasonably for you. So if you're in a place on earth where in summer, basically Isha is going to be 11 o'clock and Fajr is going to be 3:30, then if there's a measurement for Isha that allows it to be maybe 10:30, then take that measurement, because this is subjective. It's not an issue of playing with the deen. It's the fact that the whole measurement itself, al-shafaq al-ahmar, the redness in the sky, that is subjective in terms of color and where you're looking from. So this is an important piece to kind of add to your. So we use in the summer angle 15, like the 15 degrees angle to use for Isha. That's why we end up having a little bit of a buffer and being a bit earlier. And then we go back to the standard angle, which is I think 18 or 19, once we go into the winter, and pushes it down a little bit. Why? Because subhanAllah, this specific prayer is subjective in terms of how you're going to measure it. It's not an objective measurement. Does that make sense? For Dhuhr and Asr, they're pretty objective. There's not much you can do. And for Maghrib, because it's a horizon, and once the sun you can't see it, but Isha is very subjective. And it's based on what angle you're using and what you're looking at and what you're actually seeing. So it begins when the redness in the sky disappears. Its preferred time here is again like Asr, extends until the end of the first third of the night. So you make a calculation of the night, and then you calculate what the third of the night is, and it's in the first third of the night, which is the preferred time for Isha. It is permissible. Its permissible time extends until the beginning of true dawn, which is until Fajr time, basically. So it's permissible until Fajr, is preferred within the first third of the night, especially for men in the Madhab al-Shafi'i, because they should be praying in masajid. For women, it's not preferred. They can do whatever they want. The preference doesn't exist. So as a lady, there's no preferred time for Isha from you. It's from the moment the redness in the sky is gone until Fajr. Whatever time works for you is preferred for you. There's no. But for men, they should be praying it early because they should be in masajid. It's obligatory upon men to come to masajid as much as possible. For ladies, it's recommended. It's optional, so they can do whatever they want. And then the fifth prayer was subhu or al-fajr. وأول وقتها طلوع الفجر الثاني وآخره في الاختيار إلى الإسفار وفي الجواز إلى طلوع الشمس. So the time for dawn prayer, Fajr, begins at true dawn. Its preferred time extends until a yellow glow appears on the horizon, and its permissible time extends to the rising of the sun. So true dawn is when you see the first beam. There's not the first beam of light, because early on, maybe at an hour before, you can see a beam of light somewhere in the middle of the sky. That's not what you have to see at the horizon, almost all through the horizon, you have to see a beam of light begin. Right? There has to be lights coming up from all over the horizon, not just one thing in the middle, because that's the Fajr al-Kathib. That's not what we're talking about here. So the Fajr al-Sadiq, and again, you're seeing almost all through the horizon, beams of light starting to come. The moment that first beam of light, again, is very subjective. So it's subjective to a certain degree. It's based on measurements and angles. It's not based on seeing the sun, for example, because the sun, there's no lying. The moment that piece of sun starts, you've seen the sun. But it's subjective. That's why even Fajr, when it comes to places like this, there is some flexibility. So yes, you should be when it comes to Ramadan, you should stick to these timings. You should choose a measurement and then stick to that measurement to be honest with yourself and to be truthful. But there is flexibility when it comes to knowing the first moment of Fajr, because it's based on beams of light. Again, its preferred time extends until a yellow glow appears on the horizon. So as the sun, of course, as the earth is moving, slowly more light starts to appear, and then there's a bit of yellowish and greenish light. That's when the preferred time for the Shafi'i madhab ends in terms of Fajr. And this is not just the Shafi'iyya, other madhab have similar preferences. But you are allowed to pray Fajr until the first piece of sun is apparent in the horizon. The moment the first piece of sun is apparent on the horizon, Fajr is over. You've missed it. So the timing's up here. So right now it's 6:02, which is when that first wide horizon-based beam of light occurs. And then I think it's 7:10 now. I think that's when sunrise. So you have up till 7:10. But technically for the Shafi'iyya, your best time to pray is between 6 and 6:45. Because it's closer to the end, not to the beginning. So you have around 45 minutes. Yes, go ahead. I can't see because Brother Khalid put all these languages here. I don't know exactly what this is. Is that shuruq? Yeah, then 7:18. Then that's what it is. So you have from 6 to 7:18, and the preferred time would end around 6:50. Then if it's. But 7:18 is when the sun starts No. 7:18 is the moment of the rising of the sun. It's the moment the first piece of sun is going to be visible on the horizon had we had a flat piece of earth and we're just standing there looking at the horizon with no angles. So when we do that, the first beam of light, the first piece of sun occurs at 7:18. So you're safe until 7:18 basically to pray Fajr, but the preferred time is from the beginning, 6:02, until maybe 6:50, 6:55. Yes?
Like going back to Maghrib.
Yeah.
There's no preferred time that's given to Maghrib Salah.
Yeah, so Maghrib doesn't have preferred time because Maghrib, for the Jadid, for the Shafi'iyya, is the moment the adhan goes off, whatever time it takes you to make wudu, give adhan, give iqamah, and pray is the time for Maghrib. So that's for the Shafi'i on the new madhab, in his new opinion. The old opinion for the Shafi'iyya, they don't have a preferred time for Maghrib. They just have one time. Go ahead, ask your, if that answer your question? You have something else?
No, that was it, yeah.
So it's okay. No, whenever someone has a question, just for the recording piece, if some people aren't here, so if you don't ask the question into the microphone, they don't hear it. And then if I don't repeat the question, they don't understand what was asked. So whenever there's a question, just turn on the microphone. So again, remind you what we talked about Maghrib. So for the newer opinion in the Madhab Shafi'i, there's no time. It's just whatever it takes you to make wudu, do adhan, do iqamah, and then pray. The old opinion was from Maghrib until from sunset to Isha time, where the red light is no longer apparent in the horizon, and that is what the majority of Madhab also see. And this is what the newer Shafi'i scholars over the last maybe 100 years have now agreed to, and they kind of debunked their own second opinion. And this happens a lot. And I gave you this is a good piece of evidence to kind of know about. So here's a few points. Hanafis see the time of Dhuhr ending and when Asr is starting when the shade of any object is twice its length. So the Hanafi are different. So if you remember what we just talked about, the preferred time for Asr is when the length of the shadow of an object is just beyond its own length. The length of a shadow is more than the length of the object by a little bit until it's twice the length. That is the preferred time for Asr for the Shafi'iyya. The Hanafis start Asr after that. The Hanafis start Asr afterwards, after it's twice the length. And this is all based on interpretation of evidence, of what mithl and mithlain means. Mithl and mithlain sometimes can mean the same thing, depending on who is speaking. So depending on what the person who's speaking actually means, they understand differently. So this is a good example of how, this is why if you look at some of the adhan times, iqamah times, they'll have like the regular or the Hanafi time specifically. So why? It's because they have a different understanding of when Asr actually begins. It's when the length of the shadow's length is twice the length of the object. That's when Asr, so Asr starts later for the Hanafis, right? It starts a little bit later. So here we're doing 4:35. For the Hanafis, it goes up to maybe 5:20, something like that, 5:15, 5:20. Which is an opinion. But whatever you end up following, you have to stick to it. I mean, you can't choose every day whatever you want to do based on how you're going through things. At least that's why we're learning this stuff. You have to listen. This is the madhab you're learning. You stick to this madhab in terms of your time prayers. If you're not, I'm Hanafi, always been Hanafi, then learn what they do and then stick to that time prayers as you go along in life. And whatever you stick to is fine. But you just have to commit to something because you're basing it on interpretation of evidence, right? The old Shafi'i opinion and the opinion of the rest of the schools of jurisprudence is that Maghrib time extends to the beginning of Isha time, red light in the horizon. And I explained that, but I just have it there as a piece of information. Then I talked about the difference in determining night prayers. It comes down to having a flat horizon, determining which angle you're going to use to actually look at the horizon and see the light. So that's why we have these difference of opinions. All right. Here's something that's important that he didn't talk about, but I'll talk about quickly. The timing for Jum'ah, Friday prayers, is preferable to be earlier in winter and later during summer. That's what the Prophet ﷺ used to do. He used to make it a bit earlier during winter and a bit later during summer to kind of stay away from bad timings in terms of cold. And it was based, the hadith that quote the Prophet ﷺ teaching this explains the reason, looking for better weather. Trying to get out of being very cold or very, very hot during the day, avoiding cold times in winter and hot times in summer. So the Hanbalis, and this is important. Why is it important? Because this is something that is relevant to us. It happens a lot. Why is it that some masajid are praying Jumu'ah at 12 and you have a Dhuhr at 1:17? So why are we praying like an hour and 15 minutes prior to Dhuhr? So here's why. Here's the again, this course is not designed for this stuff, but I think it's at least important for you to have an understanding of why certain things are happening. So the Hanbalis allow the time for Friday prayer, specifically Friday, specifically Jumu'ah, because it's a large gathering and people have to leave their work and they have to come out. For specifically the Hanbalis see that Friday prayers to be before Dhuhr time and start when Eid prayers would start. So the Hanbalis are actually okay with it going, at least for the majority of them, not all of them, going up back maybe to around 10:30ish. So they're actually going. Some of them even see it going prior to that, because that's when the Eid prayers are around, something like 8, 9, 10. So they actually see it going far back as that. Some Hanbalis today in their own madhab, they don't agree with all that, but the majority of the Hanbali madhab have always have accepted that over the years. So that's why, and this is the fatwa that has been used. So when you're praying 12, it's because for the Hanbalis, for Jumu'ah specifically, they're okay with you going back. And they're okay with you going back an hour or two, they're fine with that. All of them. If you go more than 2 hours behind, so let's say Dhuhr is 1:15, so they're okay up to maybe 11. But if you go before 11, if you're like doing 10 and 8 and 9 and 8, you may find some of the Hanbali scholars that aren't okay with that. It's too early. But within 2 hours, they're okay with you going before in 2 hours. So I get a lot of high school students who come and ask me, we only have time off or whatever during 11. That's fine. Just pray Jumu'ah. Especially because this opinion is valid and have evidence to support it. Because the Prophet ﷺ would move Dhuhr around. Again, this is a long discussion. I'm not going to go. The scope of the course is not to go into the long discussion, but I'm just at least letting you understand that there are those who looked at this and have an opinion that's not new. This is an old opinion. None of these opinions. When it's a new opinion, I'll tell you. This was maybe last 50 years or something. And I'll give you the names. But this is an opinion that exists in the Hanbali madhab for a very, very long time. And the Malikis allow the time for Friday prayer specifically to end closer to Maghrib time. And interestingly enough to pray Asr before the sun sets. So the Malikis are okay for us to actually pray Dhuhr, like have Jumu'ah. So Maghrib is 7:15. To have Jumu'ah, just as much for us to give the khutbah, pray Jumu'ah, and then pray Asr before the sun sets. In their madhab, they're okay with that. So the Malikis are okay pushing it forward, and the Hanbalis are okay taking it forward, specifically because taking it backwards, specifically because the Prophet ﷺ moved Jumu'ah around a little bit in his life, and they looked at that as the Prophet ﷺ trying to find times to allow people to actually pray this properly, leave their work, not be in a position where it's too hot or it's too cold or it's too difficult. So there was the concept of maqasid, meaning the achieving the outcome, which is allowing, because Jum'ah is a Eid prayer for us. You can look at it, that's why the Hanbalis actually allow this, because they argue that the Eid prayers start at this time, and Jum'ah is our Eid every single week. It's our Eid, so it should have permissibility to start at a similar time. And the Malikis look at the fact that it can be extremely hot in most parts of the world if you pray it right on time. So if you push it a little bit, you can push Asr a little bit, it's not a problem. So again, these are all just different interpretations and arguments that exist, and I think it's beneficial for you to know that those opinions exist there in case you see it or it's brought up in front of you. We move on. وشرائط وجوب الصلاة ثلاثة أشياء الإسلام والبلوغ والعقل وهو حد التكليف. And the conditions for the three conditions obligate prayer. Meaning you have to have, these three conditions have to exist in order for a prayer to be obligatory upon anyone. And the first one is being a Muslim, obviously. You don't ask a kafir to pray. At least I hope you don't. And then being mature, and maturity here is a big, this is an art. So again, depending on how detailed I want to go into this course, that word there, we could spend at least just talking about how they defined bulugh. Are we talking about sexual maturity, physical maturity? Are we talking about mental maturity? What type of maturity are we talking about? Back in the day, people would mature all at once, meaning they would hit puberty, and at that time they would be working. They would get married within a couple of months. My grandfather, not my great-grandfather, my grandfather married, he was 13, and my grandmother was 14. They had 10 children, right? And 3 of them died, so she had 13 pregnancies. So he was 13, and this is not my no, this is my grandfather. They had to go, he didn't want to get married, he ran away, they had to go actually fetch him, and he had to be married against his will. So it wasn't even something he was too keen to do. But this was a different time, different time. It's just the cult, again, you have to always remind yourself that when you're studying this stuff, you're actually listening to someone speak in a time that you don't understand. You think he doesn't understand. No, you don't understand. You don't understand that the person who was writing this was living in an era that you don't comprehend at all. Like if you were to be, if you were to put in a time machine and just kind of parachute it into that time, you wouldn't know what to do. You wouldn't know how to carry yourself. It's just what was expected of you, the harshness and difficulty of life, what was required of someone to actually be personable and to be successful was a whole different set of skills that most people don't even have today. So it's very interesting that these things still apply, honestly. Like most of this matan, like 90% of it apply 100%, and just a few things we have to kind of be mindful of in terms of changing things. It's because of a very different context of the world today that existed back then. So al-bulugh, and we'll just stick to being mature. Let's not fully define it and go into too much detail, but know that there's a lot of debate on how we define maturity today. I don't necessarily agree that it's just sexual maturity. I think there's more to it than that, but that's how it's defined for the majority of scholars, to be clear. Wal-aql, which is of sound mind, meaning being sane. Being sane. If someone is insane or someone has mental or cognitive impairment or mental impairment, then that person is not obviously obligated to prayer. And these three things, the combination of these three conditions is a definition of legal responsibility. Taklif is an important term. So ritual, legal, Islamic responsibility, taklif, right? In Islam, there are certain things, and this will be more important once we talk about usul fiqh, but please remember this word and what this means. You are Islamically, legally responsible, right? When you reach, if you're Muslim, if you're mature, and if you're sane, then you're responsible. And you're going to be held accountable for all the choices that you make. You're going to be asked about them, you're going to have to defend them and explain why you did what you did. And that's very important to understand when we talk about Islam in general. So this is hadith taklif in general. I don't need anything else out of this. Right. وَالصَّلَوَاتُ الْمَسْنُونَاتُ خَمْسٌ. And there are five recommended prayers. الْعِيدَانِ وَالْكُسُوفَانِ وَالْإِسْتِسْقَاء. So the two Eid prayers, obviously Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, and the solar and lunar eclipse prayer, when there's khusuf or kusuf, when it's solar eclipse or lunar eclipse. And then the final one is istisqa, the drought prayer. These are the five kind of higher recommended prayers. وَالسُّنَنُ التَّابِعَةُ لِلْفَرَائِضِ 17 رَكَعَةً. There are 17 prayer cycles, which is 17 rak'ah, of recommended prayers associated with the obligatory daily prayers, rawatib. So here, we do have some difference between what the scholar, Ali Rahamu, explains, what the Shafi'i madhab actually recommends or talks about today, and what other madhab may look at. So what I'll do is I'll point out something here. So the highly recommended prayers for the Shafi'i madhab, out of the 17 that are mentioned, the highly recommended prayers, call them the highly recommended prayers, are 10 rak'at, right? 2 before Fajr, 2 before Dhuhr, 2 after Dhuhr, and 2 after Maghrib, and 2 after Isha. Those are the 10 that the Shafi'is highly recommend out of the 17. They can all be done at different times if they weren't done during their assigned time. So if you didn't pray it after Dhuhr, doesn't matter, you can pray it after Maghrib. Right? You can add it later on. You can do it as a part of Qiyam al-Layl. Doesn't matter. As long as you just in your niyyah, I'm trying to hold on to those 10 rak'at during the day. But the Imam, rahmatullah alayhi, points out the 17 rak'ah that the Shafi'i look at. So number 1, 2 before the dawn prayer, 2 before Fajr, 4 before, so ركعتا الفجر وأربع قبل الظهر وركعتان بعدها وأربع قبل العصر وركعتان بعد المغرب وثلاث بعد العشاء يوتر بواحدة منهن. So 4 before the noon prayer and 2 after his performance, 4 before the Asr prayer, 2 after sunset prayer, 3 after night prayer, which is Isha, 1 being witr. So there's a few extra ones that you can see here, which is 4 before Asr. So this is a sunnah, but it's not a highly recommended sunnah. But it's a sunnah, it's there, but it's just not the one of the rawatib or the highly recommended ones. So the Shafi'iyya basically today have the salawat al-mastunat, the recommended prayers in general, and then the recommended prayers that are associated with al-dhuhr, wal-asr, wal-maghrib, wal-isha, wal-fajr. So the ones that we see here, al-eid, wal-kusuf, wal-istisqa, those are just recommended prayers on their own. They have their own merits. They exist on their own. And then you have specifically the ones that are attached to a prayer. And then you have things that are attached to a prayer specifically, which are the 17 that we're talking about here. 10 of them are highly recommended, which I pointed out in the slide afterwards. But these 17 are all have a certain degree of being recommended. So 2 before Fajr, 4 before Dhuhr and 2 after, 4 before Asr, 2 after Maghrib, and then 2 after Isha, and then doing Salat al-Witr right afterwards. وثلاث نوافل مؤكدات صلاة الليل وصلاة الضحى وصلاة التراويح. And then 3, so here they call them supererogatory nafila prayers are emphasized. I don't know why they use this term. I never understood this term very clearly. I don't think it makes that much of a difference in general. I'll differentiate for you why these 3 why these three categories exist. These here are the salawat that are sunnah that have specific times and specific reasons, right? They have specific time and specific reasons, which is Eid, and then khusuf and kusuf, and istisqa. There's a specific time for them, there's a specific reason for them, and that's what he's trying to categorize here. And then here, these ones are associated with the obligatory prayers, either before as-salah or after it. And then these are the daily nawafil that are not attached to an obligatory prayer. Right? These are the ones that aren't attached to an obligatory prayer, which is Salatul Layl, which is basically Qiyamul Layl, the night vigil prayer. And then Salatul Duha, which is the mid-morning prayer, which is the one that you do around 10 o'clock or 10:30 or 9 or 8, depending on when the sun is coming up. And then Salatul Tarawih, which happens during Ramadan, which is similar to Layl. So these ones here have specific times and specific reasons for them. And then the rest of them have either attached to associated prayers or they're not attached or not associated with obligatory prayers. And this is how the Shafi'i kind of break them down. Sorry? So this is talking about Salat al-Witr, which is witr. Which is Salat al-Witr. So instead of saying 2 rak'at after Isha, he said 3, 2 being sunnah, and then 2 being the sunnah associated with the prayer, and then one of them, the third one being rak'at al-Witr. So when you pray witr, obviously you have to pray, you can pray 3, 5, 7, 11, that's what the Shafi'iyya, they take out 9. The rest of them don't have a problem with 9. So these are the denominations you can use for witr. Here he just points out that 3 is the least, is the basic what you can do. 2 nawafil, 2 recommended prayers right after Isha, and then one of them is going to be, the last one is going to be the witr prayer that you add to it. Yeah, so like witr prayer, like what we do in Ramadan, for example, is usually 3 rak'at. But you can do up to 5 or 7, but 3 is the least you can do. Shafi'iyya don't permiss 1. At least the prominent position in the madhab doesn't. Others do, but the Shafi'iyya don't. Now, I put a lot of pieces of evidence here, because there's everything that he pointed out here has evidence in the books of hadith that kind of point out that these different prayers and what they can do. I don't require you to know any of them specifically, but I would ask you to know this one here, the one the sister had pointed out, because I think it's a simple one. Al-witru rak'atun min akhir al-layl. The Prophet would say al-witr is a rak'ah at the end of the night, right? And the Imam here, because this is another example of how the newer Shafi'i scholars may differ with the Shafi'i madhab. So he points out, وَهَذَا أَقَلُّ الْوِتْر. That's the least of witr is 1 rak'ah. وَأَوْسَطُهُ ثَلَاث رَكَعَاتٍ. And what's a medium or a medium amount is 3 rak'at. وَأَكْثَرُهُ 11 رَكَعَةٍ. And it goes as far as 11 rak'at in terms of how many rak'at you can do for witr. One of my teachers used to pray every night 11 rak'ah of witr. He used to read 10 ajza in them. Every rak'ah he used to read a juz' every night. So he finished the Quran every 3 nights, yeah.
So that wouldn't be considered part of the night prayer,
No, it does. Yeah, any prayer that you pray after Maghrib basically is considered a part of the night prayer. Yeah, but it's still, so the word qiyam al-layl is a word that is an umbrella term. That under it comes every prayer that is, every recommended prayer that is prayed after Maghrib. So it's an umbrella term. So witr has its own name, but it is technically under qiyam al-layl. Like it's still a part of qiyam al-layl. So when we say a rak'ah, this is only qiyam al-layl because there's nothing else to call it. Like if you have so example, the sunnah of Isha, the 2 rak'at after Isha is a part of qiyam al-layl as an umbrella term, but it's also the sunnah that is associated with Isha. So when we call, but we're used to calling qiyam al-layl as in the rak'at that have no other name. There's nothing else. They're not after Isha, they're not a part of witr, they're not part of anything. Just that's what they're called, qiyam al-layl. But anything you pray after Maghrib that is not fard, like is not Salat al-Isha or Salat al-Maghrib, is considered a piece of qiyam al-layl. Right? So it gets it has 2 labels. It's it's witr and it's qiyam al-layl. And the rak'at that are only labeled as qiyam al-layl is because they have no other label to be labeled to.
So you would say witr is the last of qiyam.
Yeah, it's last thing of qiyam al-layl. Yeah, it should be the last thing. So, and of course, this piece of evidence is also talked about a lot because the Prophet, because other hadith that kind of talk about it doesn't have to be the last one, but it's preferred to be the last one. That's why sometimes in Ramadan, for example, we would pray witr, and then we pray tahajjud afterwards, just to make life easier for those who may not be able to come for tahajjud. Yes.
So if I end up praying witr and then I woke up for
You can pray tahajjud, yes. You just don't repeat witr again. So you pray one witr a night only.
So I can pray after the.
Yeah, so you just pray one witr a night. That's the point. Is why you don't pray it twice. It's preferred to be at the end of the night if you know for sure that you're going to be up at the end of the night. If you're not sure that you can come for the end of the night, or you're not going to be awake, or the jama'ah is doing it early, then do it with the jama'ah and then pray tahajjud afterwards. That's not a problem. Yes. So for the Shafi'iyya, you divide them. For the Shafi'iyya, you divide them, meaning you pray two, and then you do taslim, and then you pray one, right? And is there an opinion of not dividing them? Yeah, there is. There's an opinion where you pray them similar to Maghrib. And there's another opinion that exists within the schools where you pray them three with one tashahhud only. So there's an opinion where you pray actually 3 rak'at with only one tashahhud. That also exists. It's much weaker. The strongest opinion that's out there is what I explained to you, where you pray 2 rak'at with a taslim, and then you pray a third that's alone. The other opinion that exists is you pray it similar to Maghrib, which is a kind of a weak opinion. And then another opinion that's also weak is where you pray them all 3 in a row without a tashahhud in the middle, just the tashahhud at the end of the third rak'ah. So all those exist, but for the Shafi'is, not all of them exist, just the one that I explained to you does. But the other ones, you'll find them in the book, in the different schools of jurisprudence, but they're there.
So just one more thing. So if you were to pray 5 or 7 or 11, would you sit after every 2 rak'ahs?
So depending on which, so it depends on which madhab you're going to follow, It's a long discussion, so I'm not going to. But what's the best opinion here? The strongest opinion is you pray 2, you do taslim, pray 2, do taslim, pray 2, and then pray 1 at the end. And that's that's the most sound opinion amongst all the opinions that are out there. It has the most evidence, and it doesn't confuse people, because if you do it any other way, people can get very, very confused in terms of how it's going to happen. So again, here are the highly recommended prayers. Out of the ones that are attached, the 17 that were pointed out that are attached to fara'id, out of those 17 recommended prayers, the highly recommended ones, the 10 are these 10. And some scholars talk about 12 outside of the madhab al-Shafi'i, but for the Shafi'iyya, these 10 are the ones that are the highest recommended prayers that are associated with obligatory salawat. They're associated with Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha and Fajr, which is 2 before Fajr, 2 before Dhuhr, 2 after Dhuhr, 2 after Maghrib, 2 after Isha. And they can all be done in different times. So if you don't do them on time, it's best obviously to do them when they happen. But if you can't do them at a different time, the Prophet ﷺ, why are they highly recommended? Because you have evidence that the Prophet ﷺ used to make up for them. He didn't make up for nawafil. He didn't make up for recommended stuff most of the time. Like he would make up for something fard if they missed it for whatever reason. But for something that is a recommended thing, he wouldn't make up for it. If he didn't get it, he didn't get it. But these ones he would. If he missed it, he would go and pray it later to make up for it, because he kind of held himself to it. So that just shows you that it's a higher degree of recommendation or of sunnah. Again, the word sunnah, nafila, these all means things that are recommended that aren't obligatory. No, that's a fard kifaya. So that's a communal obligation. It's a communal obligation. So it's an meaning some group in the society has to do it. So it's an obligatory prayer on the society, not on the individual. Someone died, some of us have to pray janazah. If none of us do, we all pay for it. But we don't all have to do it. We don't have to all leave our work and come pray janazah, but a group of us has to do it in order for the community not to be held accountable for that. Sorry? Whatever it comes to the number of people in the society and what's available. So there's really no numbers that are attached to that specifically. That would suffice, It has to at least happen. There has to be someone to do it, and of course, the more the better. But there's no specific numbers. Some scholars talked about numbers, but that's really not something we can talk about here, because it's just a different setup altogether. Yeah.
I had a question regarding the nafila.
Yeah.
So you said we can make it up. When would we be able to do so?
Yeah.
The rawatib. When would be able to make it up? So there's before Fajr, before Dhuhr. So if I were to make it up, could I do it like after Maghrib, say, or?
Yeah, after Maghrib or after Isha, or before Dhuhr or after Dhuhr. You just stay away from some of the timings where you shouldn't pray, which is right after Fajr and right after Asr. So after Fajr and after Asr, once you pray those two prayers, there shouldn't be any nawafid. There shouldn't be any recommended prayers that occur during that time. After Fajr and after Asr. And it'll come up. We'll talk about that inshallah in a moment. Yes.
Sorry, just on that question. So, for example, if you come to the masjid between Asr and Maghrib, do you pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid?
Again, an issue of difference of opinion. Some people say yes, some people say no. There's really no good. Neither opinions have a superiority over the others. I kind of go by you do because there's a reason for the prayer. I mean, you don't pray a nafila that has no specific reason for it. Making up for a nafila is not a good reason for something because you can do it's not something that you have to do. But you walk into the masjid. Most scholars argue that's a good reason to pray, so praying is fine. But some scholars say no, so it's an issue of difference of opinion within the madhahib itself, not just within the madhab, not just amongst the madhahib. So it's something that is differed upon quite heavily. So whatever you do, you'll be fine, inshallah, and you'll be safe. Okay. وشرائط الصلاة قبل الدخول فيها خمسة أشياء. And there are 5 prerequisites for prayer. There are 5 conditions that need to happen before you actually enter a prayer. You have to have 5 things. طهارة الأعضاء من الحدث والنجس وستر العورة بلباس طاهر والوقوف على مكان طاهر والعلم بدخول الوقت واستقبال القبلة. So 5 things. Number 1, the absence of ritual impurity. Hadath and inexcusable filth. So we talked about those 2 things, right? We already talked about what hadath is. We talked about the ritual impurity, which is basically what would require you to make wudu, whether you let out gas or you go to the bathroom. And inexcusable filth, we talked about, and I gave you that assignment where what types of filth can be excusable, and that's why that document exists there for you to kind of fill in to translate one of them, because these are excusable filths. The inexcusable filth, which is a patch of urine or feces, or you're wearing something that has, for the Shafi'iyya, dog or pig hair or saliva on it, that you have to remove that. You have to remove the ritual impurity by making wudu or doing ghusl if you have janaba, and you have to remove the filth by cleansing your clothes or changing them to something that doesn't have that. Number 2, covering one's nakedness with clothes that are pure. So satr al-awra. And what is nakedness? And I'll explain that. I think I explained it here. So for the Shafi'i madhab, the nakedness that needs to be covered for prayer, the awra, again, awra here awra is a big word in Arabic. It doesn't necessarily just only mean that. But for the purpose of fiqh, that's what it means. It means whatever pieces of your body that you should be covering in order for the prayer to be valid. So for the Shafi'i madhab, it's between the navel and the knee for men. Neither the navel nor the knee are awra for the Shafi'i madhab. So for the Shafi'iyya, neither the navel specifically nor the knee are actually awra, but you have to make sure that everything right beside them should be covered. So the Shafi'iyya say you should cover them because if you don't cover them, you're probably going to end up more of it is going to be apparent. So you should be covering that within prayer for men specifically. And everything aside from the face and hands for women is considered awra. Feet for women is an issue of difference of opinion within the madhab. So Imam Muzani doesn't see it to be awra specifically. Hanafis don't consider feet awra either. But the rest of the madhahib do. And that's just for ladies to know in terms of their prayer. So for the Shafi'iyya, everything besides the hands and the face. And for Imam Muzani, which is, again, I pointed out, one of the great scholars of the Shafi'i madhab, he doesn't see feet, just like the Hanafis don't. The rest of them do. And for men, it's between the navel and the knee. The navel and the knee specifically aren't awrat. And this is going to come again, but I want you to just know it now so that I don't get asked about it. But you should probably be covering it because if you're going to be moving around and if you have them out, then you're probably going to end up exposing parts under it or above it. Yes?
If you're looking at somebody outside that's like wearing like short shorts, they're a boy or like something like that, is it haram to look at that?
Yeah, you shouldn't be staring at. You shouldn't be staring at body parts regardless of whether they are exposed or not exposed. If they're exposed, obviously it's worse. Number 3, praying on something that is pure. So you have to actually stand. What you're praying upon should have purity. So you have to make sure that there's no filth in where you're doing sujood and where you're sitting.
I just have a question about the awra.
Yeah.
If a person for some reason isn't wearing clothes that cover their awra, and it's time for prayer, and for whatever reason they can't wear clothes, should they just pray or no?
So they pray and then they have to repeat.
Okay.
So they pray and repeat if they have no way to get something to cover the awra that is apparent. Then they pray if their time is running out. If the time is not running out, they go and find a place to pray appropriately. But if they can't, then they repeat later.
I have a question for like the woman when praying. What if someone's like a niqabi and like a man walks by? Are they allowed to like cover themselves and put their niqab down? Or?
So the prominent opinion of the madhab is no, but there are scholars who allow for that. But the prominent opinion is no. When she's praying, she doesn't cover her face. Even it doesn't make a difference whether she's covering. So if someone's wearing a niqab outside of prayer, or someone who, for some reason, is not wearing hijab outside of prayer, during prayer, this is how you're supposed to be. Your face should be apparent, and so is your hands. But the scholars allow for at least there's enough people who've talked about this and have brought up evidence for it, that if a lady who wears a niqab is praying and her face is apparent, but then there's too many men around and she covers it, they see that to be permissible. It's not ideal, obviously, but it is permissible. Allahu a'lam. 4, knowing that prayer time has entered, obviously knowing that it's time for salah, and facing the direction of prayer, or the Kaaba, the Qibla. So going towards it. So these are the 5 conditions you need in order for you to enter prayer. So you have to have tahara. You can't be wearing something filthy or being in ritual impurity. You have to cover your nakedness. For men is different from women. You have to cover that. You have to pray in an area that is pure. You have to know that the salah's time has entered, so you can't pray before time. That's your fault. You have to make sure that you know that it's time for prayer, or else you'd have to repeat. If you prayed beforehand, you have to do it again. And then facing the direction of the Qibla. The Shafi'iyya specifically are very picky when it comes to Qibla. They're the only madhab that way. But he didn't talk about it here, so I'm going to bring it up. Most people don't care about this because they just take out their Qibla app and they just follow it. But the Shafi'iyya specifically always been very, very picky about the Qibla. I mean, they want it to be Imam Shafi'i wanted it to be very, very specific. The rest don't have that same degree of care for accuracy when it comes to Qibla. The Hanafis, for example, just care whether it's east or west. God bless their hearts. The easiest thing in the world is just following them. There's either east or west, doesn't matter which way you're going. The Shafi'i needs to be very accurate. So a lot of these little things that you're seeing here come from that search for accuracy. And today is a very difficult discussion. At least once a week I have to have a long argument with somebody about whether we're praying in the right direction or not. Because when you look at the map, you find that Mecca is a little bit under the equator, right, to our east, and we're a little bit above the equator. Yet we're praying east what? East-north. Right? So why? Is because the earth is not what they showed the earth to be. Like the earth is, like when I talk about these directions, it's not really what the directions are. If you want the shortest straight line, if straight lines are a thing, which is hard to define even on its own, from London to Mecca, it goes in the form of a east-north. Now whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. I've had these discussions for a long time, and I'm still unsure. And I go by what the group go, but I'm still kind of on the fence in terms of whether we should just be praying purely to the east and not need all this any north business or south business. But again, I've had some discussions with geologists, and they of course, lost my concentration 5 minutes into their explanation. And even though I had time to listen to it, I still can't understand exactly what they're explaining to me. But there's a lot of details here that apparently, if we pray, you can pray east, south. If we are going to imagine that the straight line that takes us to the Kaaba goes into the earth, like it actually penetrates the earth and comes on the other side, then it's if you're going to be on top, if you're going to stay on top of the earth in an equal distance or equal height from the مستوى سطح البحر, the what is that? Sea level, then you have to go east, north, and it's a very confusing thing. So it doesn't matter. But all I want to point out, the Shafi'iyya care about accuracy. Like they were always, Shafi'i took that very seriously in terms of accuracy. The rest didn't have that same care for accuracy. Just as a point to add. ويجوز ترك القبلة في حالتين. في شدة الخوف وفي النافلة وفي السفر على الراحلة. So there are, in 2 situations, it is permissible to deviate from the direction of prayer. For the Shafi'i, there's 2 situations. Yes.
Can you define deviate from the direction of prayer? Like, is it just away from the Qibla?
Yeah, in praying in any direction, for example. So if there is intense fear, and if praying non-obligatory prayers during a journey while riding a mount or even driving a car. So if you're driving towards, if you're driving on the highway somewhere, and it's a long drive, and really you're not making a lot of movements because you're driving one of those automatic cars that kind of drive for you, then you can basically pray a sunnah, even if you're not facing the Qibla. You can pray a sunnah if you're not facing the Qibla. You can't pray fard. I had this question before. Can I pray fard sitting in the car, even though Qibla is the opposite? No. You have to get out and pray fard appropriately. If you're facing the Qibla, there are opinions that allow you to pray fard in the car sitting down, but there are not a lot of them. And they're not very strong. Because if you are able to stand up straight, For the fara'id, as we'll see soon, you have to stand up straight. You shouldn't be praying sitting down or lying down. But for nafila, for the sunnah prayers, it doesn't matter. For sunnah prayers, you can stand sitting down, you can pray, sitting down, pray lying down, it doesn't matter. And for the Shafi'i, if you're traveling and you want to pray, because there's not much else to do if you're traveling, if you're sitting on a camel, and the camel is just walking, then you're going to be sitting there for a long time. If you want to pray sunnah, but the qibla is in a different direction, it's okay for recommended prayers. And if you are in intense fear, this is usually war, or this is usually in a position where you can't really have no other question. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Like I was on an airplane the other day.
Yeah.
Like I had to pray Ashi,
Yeah.
Maghrib, and I did it sitting down. Do I re-pray when I come
Yeah.
back?
So you pray it. You pray all these prayers when you're traveling, and then you repeat them. If you're in the wrong direction of qibla, if you're in the right direction of the qibla, then you're fine to pray, even if you're doing it sitting down on a plane, because there's opinions that allow that when things are sticky and there's no prayer area on the plane. But if you're in the wrong direction of the qibla, like the qibla is this way, and you're sitting this way, and it's at Maghrib time, you pray if you can't change your direction, and then you repeat these prayers afterwards.
So do I repeat two? Because I did three standing up, and then I had to go to the plane. Sorry.
No, you repeat the full prayer.
So I do four.
Yeah, you repeat the whole prayer. Go.
Plus a jump.
Yeah. Yeah, so you repeat the whole thing, yeah. And that's the prominent opinion. There are other opinions that allow you to repeat two, but the prominent opinion is that you repeat four, and that has more evidence to it.
When it states fear, it doesn't say non-obligatory prayers. So you can pay.
Yeah, so let's say you're in the middle of war, so you can, which we'll come and talk. We'll talk about it at some point. So they pray Salat al-Khawf, whether you're whether in war or you're running away from something, so you can pray Maghrib or Isha in whatever direction you have to pray them. Meaning, if I turn my back and pray to Qibla, my enemy is behind me and they may kill me. So I have to pray towards my enemy so that I stay alert. And I pray Maghrib and Isha, I don't have to repeat those. So that's khawf, that's during intense fear. Obviously, none of us really have that, these type of examples, at least for the most part, so they're not as effective. What excuse? This is for Qibla. How does that change in a mall?
Fear of crowds, I guess.
Yeah, but this is talking about Qibla. No, I'm talking about intense fear. For what? For changing Qibla? Okay, so I get what you mean. That has nothing to do with anything here specifically, because this is talking about just the permissibility to change qibla. But no, in no situation are you allowed to not pray because you're concerned of something, especially not in this country. Like maybe if you were living in a different place, that would be applicable, but not here. If you're living here, you're able to pray. If you're out shopping and it's time for asr and you're going to lose asr, then you don't want to pray inside the mall, then you leave and you go pray. And then you come back at a different day and continue your shopping. Excuses for losing prayers because you went on an errand or went somewhere is not really a good one, unless you're like going for a doctor's appointment, or like you're sitting in the dentist's chair, or you're going for surgery or something like that. Otherwise, you should pray on time. This is just to talk about that it's permissible to deviate from qibla, not to miss a prayer. Khawf, you're not allowed to miss prayer during war. Right? You're not allowed to miss prayer during war. You're not allowed to miss prayer if you, may Allah protect all of you, if you're extremely ill and fully paralyzed. You still have to pray on time. As long as the mind is working, as long as you're Muslim, and as long as that you mature, and your mind is working, you're awake, you have to pray on time. And anything that you don't do on time or properly has to have good reason for it, and has to have a proper defense for it. So shopping in the mall in Masonville in London, Ontario does not qualify as one of those things. Wallahu alam. I don't need you to know any of these pieces of evidence as far as I know. They're just there for you to read if you want to. Again, fiqh is how much fiqh you want to know is how much you're willing to read. How deep are you willing to dive into anything? So I just have these things available to you so that you can read if you want to, especially if you're capable of a bit of Arabic. And these points that I put in English are important. You should know them because they'll be a part of the evaluation at the end. وأركان الصلاة 18 ركنا. 18 ركنا. There are 18 integrals, or arkan, or pillars. I'm going to call them pillars. He calls them integrals. I don't know why exactly, but that's what he calls them. I'm going to call them pillars because that's the terminology that I find much more closer, because the word rukn is always a pillar whenever we talk about it in general. So there are 18 pillars for prayer. And he goes through them one by one, and these are important because we're going to have to talk about a couple of stuff that are associated. Yes?
I have a question about praying like the fard. So once I was at uni and it was Dhuhr time, and I saw someone like praying Dhuhr with Asr because she was scared to miss on Asr prayer. Is that okay?
No. So she pray Dhuhr, and then when it's Asr time, you leave whatever you're doing, and you ask for 5 minutes and you pray Asr. Look, when you're at university or at work, in this country, you have a fundamental civil right to step out for a couple of minutes and pray. The supervisor may not like it, the employer may not like it, but they can suck it up because this is our fundamental civil right. You have to ask for it. If you don't ask for it, then basically you are setting up the rest of us not to be able to ask for it. I went for 3 years in internal medicine not being able to pray Jummah except on site, for the 5-10 minutes, because everyone before me who were Muslim never asked for Jummah. All the physicians who were there don't necessarily ask for the time for Jummah. So it's acceptable that Muslims don't need time for Jummah when we do. We do need time for Jummah. That's an obligation. We have to go for Jummah. The rest of the prayers, I can find 5 minutes and do it, but we didn't even get time for Jummah. It's only when I got into my fellowship, I actually went to the program and said, look, I need 2 hours every Friday to pray. And since then, I never work a PM Friday. Because this is your fundamental civil right to actually do that. So the sisters and brothers who are scared of asking for it, go ask for it and take what is yours. Don't pray beforehand, don't pray. Now obviously if you miss Asr, then you miss Asr, you go. Praying it beforehand doesn't make a difference. Either you pray it on time, or else if you pray it before, if you're praying it before, then might as well pray it after, because there's no difference there, because you're still not praying it on time. But you have time, so ask for it. Go and, I need 3, how long does it take to pray Asr? If you have wudu, it takes you 2.5 minutes, but it's not going to end anything, really. Even if you have an exam, you can still go and ask for that. So I don't, again, these are not good excuses in my opinion. Again, if you were living in a different country, meaning if I was in Syria, funny enough, and you asked me about praying in the army, I would have asked you a very different answer. Because it's a different issue there altogether. It's a different situation, and you can get killed, and you can get thrown into jail, you can be horribly harmed. But here, really, it's just you didn't ask for it. Like you just didn't have the courage or the comfort level to go say, I need a few minutes to pray. Why aren't other Muslims doing it? I don't know. Ask them. I need 2 minutes to pray. Don't tell me why other people aren't doing what they're doing, because that's their thing, right? You got a lot of that. You don't drink? Why? I know a Muhammad who drinks. Well, that's his Muhammad's thing, not me. I don't. Go ahead.
So one question about da'wah I forgot to ask is about the shoulders for men.
Not for the Shafi'iyya. Yeah, others do, but let's not get into every madhab in the world. Again, I don't want to become too comparative, but the Shafi'i don't have a problem with the shoulders, yeah.
Like in terms of praying on time, say you pray Dhuhr,
Yeah.
and you're going to travel.
Yeah.
Right before Asr time hits.
The moment you intend to travel, you can do qasr al-jama. But let's wait until we get to that piece of the. But we'll talk, because we're going to have to talk about jama' qasr anyway, so I'll explain much more about that at that time. Okay, let's go through these before the time is up. We're not going to make it, are we? No, we're not going to make it. Oh, I was supposed to go this far. Oh well. Okay, let's do at least the arkan. It's okay. This one is going to be longer. There'll be other chapters in this book that are much quicker because they just don't have as much info in them and they're less relevant. But these are relevant, so it's okay. But just at least get through these ones. So we have 18 pillars of salah for the Shafi'iyya. Number 1, an-niyyah. As everything, there's always almost a pillar for everything is niyyah, having the intention, knowing what you're doing. Number 2, wal-qiyamu ma'al qudra. Standing when one is capable of doing so. So if you're capable of doing, you stand. If you are not capable, you don't have to. It's preferred that if you are not able to stand the whole prayer because of pain, but you're capable of standing, if generally you're walking, then you start the prayer standing up, and then you sit. You don't start your prayer sitting down for the obligatory prayer. For the sunnah, you can start praying lying down. It doesn't make a difference. But for fard, if you're capable of standing up, if I see you walking out, if you're just walking out, then your prayer should start standing up, and then you can sit. So that makes sense. But it's okay to sit if you have back pain or you have some good excuse for it. But you should start standing up. And this is not just for the Shafi'iyya. This is for all of the madhab. This is like agreed upon. You should stand. If you're able to walk out and stand, you should start your prayer standing up, and then go ahead and sit down whenever you need to. وَتَكْبِيرَةُ الْإِحْرَامِ, saying the opening Allahu Akbar. So Takbiratul Ihram at the beginning, the first one, Allahu Akbar, that is a rukn, that's a pillar. If you start prayer without that, your prayer does not stand. What's important about pillars? Here's what's important about pillars. Right. So this last piece, know this like the back of your hand. So pillars, integrals, or arkan of prayer are actions that necessitate repeating the prayer if you do not do, or going back and doing it if you forget and are still in prayer. Right? And then of course the sujood sahwa at the end. A rukn, a pillar, if you miss it and prayer is over, you repeat prayer. Your prayer is not valid. If you forget in the middle of prayer, you go back and get it. You have to go back and do it. You can't just say, oh, I'll do sujood at sahwa. No, you have to go back and actually, that's why these are very important to know. Now you'll know when you do sujood sahwa, when you don't, how to fix your prayer when you make mistakes. So make sure you know these 18 very well for the Shafi'iyya. Yeah, so takbirat al-ihram, then you go back and you do takbirat al-ihram and you start again. So if you do takbirat al-ihram, you just go and do takbirat al-ihram and then you start your prayer all over again. وَقِرَاءَةُ الْفَاتِحَةِ وَبِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ آيَةٌ مِنْهَا. For the Shafi'iyya, reciting Fatiha is a pillar. So if you don't recite Fatiha, you lose your prayer. And for the Shafi'iyya, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is an ayah. So you have to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Shafi'iyya say it out loud. The rest, not necessarily, depending on each madhab. So if you go pray in Syria, you'll find that the Imam in prayer will recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim out loud. I used to do that when I was here for many years. Here, most of people don't necessarily do it. They follow the Hanbali and Hanafi madhab, which is fine, and that's what we do. But for the Shafi'is, you read it out loud. It's recommended. But it's a rukn, it's a pillar to at least read the verse, even if you're doing it secret, but you have to read it. Because reciting Fatiha is a pillar, and Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is an ayah of Fatiha. They don't see it as an extra, something at the introductory saying. It's an actual ayah of it. So this is very important. Bowing, which is ruku'. Reposing therein, which is الطمأنينة فيه. See? Look, number 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times you find the word طمأنينة. طمأنينة is calmness, is being calm within the pillar. So bowing is a pillar, and staying there enough for your body parts to settle for at least a second or two, long enough to say one tasbiha, subhana rabbi al-a'la, is a pillar. So going like this does not count. Your prayer has to be repeated. That you lose your prayer by doing it that way. Right? So if you're reciting and you go like this, no, that doesn't. You have to stay long enough to actually say Subhana Rabbil A'la in a settled position. Like you have to be settled. You have to calm. You have to just stay there. And the hadith that we have is from the guy who walked in, and every time he prayed, go back and pray again, go back and pray again, because he was just kind of moving up and down. He was not settling. It was more of an exercise. It wasn't a prayer. I mean, they weren't staying long enough to be settled.
So do you lose a rak'ah or do you lose entire salah?
So you have to go back and do it. But if you do taslim, you sallamt, you finish your prayer, and that's how you prayed, you have to repeat the whole prayer. Right? So you have to always go, if you miss something, you have to go back and start and do it again, and repeat the rak'ah again. So you have to repeat the rak'ah. If you missed a pillar in a rak'ah, you have to repeat that rak'ah. You have to repeat the whole rak'ah before the end of prayer if you're still in the middle of prayer. If your prayer is over and you've missed a pillar, then you have to repeat the prayer altogether for the majority opinion of Shafi'i. Some of them say you can just repeat the rak'ah, but honestly there's very little evidence to support that, and that kind of messes things up. As the first one. Yeah. So there's different ways to do it. You can either start that one, consider that one as the first one, or you just keep on going, and then at the end you repeat a rak'ah and you do sujood al-sahu. And there's always going to be the 2 sajda of sahu at the end for the arkan. Rising and standing straight, which is standing up from Sami Allahu liman hamidah, so standing up, and then reposing therein. Again, tuma'nina, standing long enough to actually say the words before you go down. And I don't have to give examples, you understand what I'm saying. If you're just going up and down, you're not really settling at any point long enough to say something, then it doesn't count as, that's basically you're taking away one of the pillars of prayer. Prostrating, which is sujood, reposing therein, also tuma'nina, and sitting between the 2 prostrations and then reposing therein. So all of the basic arkan, all the basic movements, whether it's ruku', rafa', sujood, or sitting, you have to have tuma'nina. You have to settle down. You have to be there for a moment to actually say something long enough for all of your organs, all of your extremities to settle down and stop moving. Like there has to be stillness for a couple of seconds at least before you can move on. Okay? And then the final sitting, which is tashahhud al-julus al-akhir, which is the last one before when you're going to do salam. The one before in the middle isn't a pillar, and we'll explain that once we come to it. But the last one is what tashahhud fihi, meaning reciting tashahhud, at-tahiyyatu, والصلوات المباركات الزاكيات لله, or تحيات لله والصلوات والطيبات. There's 2 or 3 ways of saying it. It doesn't matter. The Shafi'iyya aren't very strict on one way versus the other, so whatever you want to say should be fine, inshallah. Saying, and then as-salatu ala nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fihi, saying the prayers upon the Prophet alayhi salatu wa salam, with Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim wa barak ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alameen innaka hamidun majid. This is the phrase or the way of saying it that the majority agree to. Honestly, the pillar part of this is just Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. If you say that, then, and you don't say anything else, then your prayer is still valid. If you don't say that much, then your prayer is invalid. You have to repeat it again. Does that make sense? It invalidates your prayer because you lost a rukn. But the right way to say it is what I explained. That's the full way, which is this, the additional part is sunnah. The initial part is the rukn. And then at-taslimatul ula. So saying the first salamu alaikum, that is the pillar. The moment you say salamu alaikum rahmatullah, you're out of your prayer for the Shafi'iyya. The second one is the sunnah. The second one is the sunnah. The first one is the pillar. The first one, you say it, you're out of prayer. And the second one is a recommended thing that you do. So if you just do Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah and you walk away, your prayer is still, you don't have to go and say the other one. The other one is not a pillar. The first one is for the Shafi'iyya. And then, وَنِيَّةُ الْخُرُوجِ مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ, intending to exit from prayer. This is deferred upon within the madhab. The majority don't see that anymore. And then تَرْتِيبُ الْأَرْكَانِ عَلَى مَا ذَكَرْنَاهُ, performing these pillars in order. Obviously, doing it in order. You can't do sujood before ruku' and then mix them up. You have to do them in order for them to actually. So these are, you should know them very well. These are the pillars of prayer, because if you miss them, your prayer has to be repeated. Yes?
When you say assalamu alaikum, you say assalamu alaikum, or you say assalamu alaikum?
No, just the first phrase is fine. The first one is more than enough. So, no, you don't have to, but it's recommended to go on. Wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh isn't for the Shafi'iyya. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah is the recommended piece. Assalamu alaikum is the pillar. You say assalamu alaikum. Other madhab have different rulings on that, meaning you don't even have to necessarily say that. You can just say anything that indicates the end of prayer. For the Hanafis, by the way. Yeah, but it's different from one. But for the Shafi'i, you have to say that phrase specifically, or anything that means that or is similar enough to that without getting into too much detail. So reposing is defined as enough time to say a tasbihah, or allowing the body parts to exist in the desired pose. In the desired pose properly. I'll fix that typo. In the desired pose properly. So that's how they define. Because it's hard. How do I define reposing or tuma'nina? Again, it's subjective. It's not an objective measurement, right? So how do you define it? They define it by one of two things: either enough to say tasbihah, or just allowing all of the body parts to exist in that pose properly for a few seconds. Intending to leave the prayer is a sunnah for the majority of the Shafi'i scholars. It's not a pillar. The Imam Abu Shuja' sees it as a pillar, but that one specifically you can drop. And know this one because it's important. I'll ask about this. And then this is very important. Pillars are the actions that necessitate repeating the prayer if you don't do, or going back and getting them if you forget them. And then at the end you're going to do sujood as-sahw regardless. And I'll add that inshallah to this slide. And those are the arkan. There's a lot of evidence that is attached to it. I don't really need you to know any of them, because all of the evidence regarding these details are debatable amongst scholars. Yes? Yeah. Halfway through is fine. Yeah.
For making up prayers, when is that usually done? Making up a prayer.
The moment you can. Outside of the time, for the majority of scholars, outside of the time that are unrecommended, which is after Fajr and after Asr, but there are still a lot of scholars who say if it's a obligatory prayer that you missed, that you make up for it even if it's amongst the unrecommended times, because this is a prayer that, this is an obligatory prayer. Maybe you pass away before Maghrib and then you missed a prayer. So there's a debate here, but either way, whenever you remember, wherever you can, you should make up for that prayer. Also, I'll end with that because it's Maghrib time, and I'll take questions early next halaqah, inshallah. And if you have any questions, just put them in the Google Classroom, and I'll answer them, inshallah.